Oh, we're filming. What's up, my channel? Welcome back to your friendly sassy blonde writer, coming at you with some more writing videos. Today's video is about how to write a story for a video game. Now, before y'all start dropping comments, this is a writing channel, not a video game channel, and I don't know that much about coding. I'm working on it, I promise. And as soon as I learn how to code, y'all will be the first people I tell. So I'm not going in depth on how to build a video game, or like with coding and textures and all that stuff. I'm not going into detail about that. I will link to a resource. My favorite resource for this is Dev Diaries, which I will link to down below, that Yahtzee does. They're very fascinating videos, and I look forward to learning more about that in the future. But today we're going to be talking about just how to write a story for a video game, not the in-depth coding stuff. So if that's what you're here for, sorry. I believe that one of the most fascinating ways to tell a story is through a video game. Now, I never really played them much when I was a kid, except for the occasional Nancy Drew game. When I was in college, my boyfriend really played video games a lot. He really enjoyed them, and then he started getting me into them, so I do play some games. I play Stardew Valley, I play through Undertale. Well, okay. I haven't finished Undertale. I'm working on it. I'm not that coordinated. I find the way that video games tell a story, usually very complex stories, and it's just fascinating to me how the story unfolds and how you as the gamer get to be an active participant in what is happening. It is fascinating to me how many different things are going on in a video game. The more I got to play video games, really taught me how just in-depth a video game was. I'd always really thought of them as toys, and then this experience gave me the opportunity to kind of see them in a different light. So today I thought it would be fun to go through the process of writing a video game story. Remember, a story is a story, it just changes how you tell it. Again, disclaimer, I am not going into the mechanics and the code that goes into developing a game specifically. I'm in a beginner game design class, but my area of expertise is in writing a story and creating a narrative, so that's what I'm here for. But to write a good video game story, you need two major things. You need the player-character dynamics figured out, and then you need an interactive space for the player to explore. So your first step in figuring out your video game story is to figure out the game mechanics. So your main questions are, what is the player doing during the game? For example, in the original Mario, that would be walking, jumping, and running. In the Nancy Drew games, that would be pointing and clicking to solve puzzles. It's very important you figure out the game mechanics first, because how your story unfolds will be affected by how the player interacts with the world. By figuring out what the player is supposed to do during the game, you'll figure out the game's central mechanics. It's how your player is playing the game. Now, this isn't the actual point of playing the game, but it is what you're doing moment to moment, and it will affect your overall story. For example, in Stardew Valley, the primary loop of the game is water crops until they grow and then harvest them. It's the busy work that connects the development of the game. Look to things that people can find cathartic or impressive and try to break it down into its most simplest forms. This can go for really any creative endeavor that you're doing, while still maintaining what makes them entertaining. Fight scenes, those are very cathartic. It can also be just a gymnast sticking the landing. Beat Saber is not a story-heavy game, but it's really popular because it's very cathartic. You're literally slashing boxes with a lightsaber. How cool is that? Once you figure out your basic game mechanics, you come up with a theme, and you develop a story from there. The second thing you need to do is figure out the basic story, the world, and the characters. This is pretty much what you would do with anything before you actually go to write it. And a video game is a lot more complicated than any other story you could write, because it requires your audience to be an active participant in what is going on. It's not like you can just describe what's happening in the Hunger Games. Your participant is literally in the trenches. They are a part of what's going on. They need to be able to interact with the world, so it makes it a lot more complicated. It's not really efficient to be more of a pantser with the plot. You have to make an outline, at least answer the questions that I am including with this. Now, if you want to be able to answer these questions on your own, I have a worksheet available on my website that I will link to down below that you are more than welcome to use for creating your video game. It doesn't have to be a detailed outline, mind you. It just has to exist so that way you have a specific structure you can follow. So ask yourself the following questions. Who is my main character? What world/environment are they in? What do they need to do? This will help you figure out your opening scene. Who or what is standing in their way? What are they going to do about it? These last two questions will help you figure out your main story. Who is standing in their way from what they need? What are they going to do about it? Again, your player is an active participant in your story. They need to do something that's active. Running away can be active. How does your main character interact with this world? This question is important because it will help you determine the type of game, the genre, if you will, that you are playing and the point of view that you are going to use. How should the audience see this point of view in your story? This question will help you figure out the basic point of view to use. You can use first person, which will make the player feel like they're actually that person. I am Nancy Drew in the Nancy Drew games. I am AJ in Far Cry 4. I am literally a part of what's happening. It's kind of like when you read a book that's told in first person where it's more immersive, but for a video game, it can make combat and just general, like it can just make moving around a little bit more difficult. You can also do third person, which is also popular, which can help the player kind of take everything in. It's not as immersive as first person, but it can be much easier to play the game this way depending on how much combat you're doing and that sort of thing. Don't give the option for the player to switch. I went through this with one game. It was like a Sherlock Holmes game, and it was just really confusing because the controls don't always transfer over. Looking at you, Frogware. Just because you're given the option to switch between first person and third person doesn't necessarily mean it's a good option to take. The controls don't always transfer over if you allow your player to switch between, so keep that in mind while you're writing your story. So we can do a case study, like I just mentioned, of Far Cry 4. Who is my main character? That's AJ. What world or environment are they in? They're in the modern world, specifically the war-torn country of Kyrat. What does he need to do? He needs to bring his mother's ashes to Lakshmana. Who or what is standing in his way? Pagan Min, the crazy warlord running the country who kidnaps AJ when he first arrives. We know he's crazy because he literally stabs one of his soldiers to death with a penknife for not answering a phone call. What is AJ gonna do about it? He teams up with the rebels and he ends up fighting them. How does he interact with the world? He shoots or uses his weapon. And how should the audience see this story? It's in first person, so you are playing as AJ. The next thing you are going to do once you've answered all these questions, you're going to outline the story. Again, you need to outline because you need to figure out the branches of your story. So of course you need the beginning, that's the setup with the inciting incident. Your inciting incident is, like I said in previous videos, your inciting incident is the reason why things aren't going exactly the way your main character wanted them to and what you're going to do about it. Then of course you need your main story and then an ending. Now if you do an open world game, you have to throw in some other stories and some other quests in there, but when you're first going through, you want to just outline the main story. Everything else can kind of branch off as you write it. The beginning of your story is very important because it needs to set everything up. It needs to introduce us to the main character, introduce us to the world/environment, show us the MC's main goal and immediate goal, his main goal in life and his immediate goal in the moment, and have an inciting incident that throws the MC off track for achieving their goal. Otherwise, it's not very interesting. It's not very interesting to play Mario if all you're doing is plumbing all day, you're not fighting Bowser. And it also sets up how the MC is going to get back on track. How is Mario going to get Princess Peach today? Then you're going to use throwback questions from earlier, who your main character is, the world and environment, what do they need to do, What they need to do will help you figure out your opening scene, and who or what is standing in their way. That will usually is going to be your inciting incident. What is your character going to do about it? That's going to set up the rest of the game. So let's do two case studies. We're going to start with Stardew Valley, one of my favorite games ever. The main character, it's an RPG, so it's whoever you want it to be. It's you! World/environment, basically the regular world. It's a peaceful, rural town in the mountains. The MC's main goal is to be happy. The inciting incident, you're not happy at your boring office job, so then you quit and you go to live on a farm. Who here has not had that secret fantasy of just running away to the mountains and starting a farm? Then your setup is you move to your grandfather's old farm in Stardew Valley and you start a life there. Another case study is Deus Ex Human Revolution. The main character is Adam Jensen, an ex-cop turned chief of security at Sharif Industries. The world/environment is like a cyberpunk, futuristic world where humans can get augmentations and advanced artificial organs capable of greatly improving and enhancing the human's body's performance that are created divided in between the haves and the have-nots. That's your high concept description right there. Your MC's main goal in the opening scene is to keep the company and its employees safe. Inciting incident is when trying to stop a terrorist organization and terrorist attacks on the company, Adam gets wounded and he almost dies. He gets a bunch of augmentations and is turned into a half-machine super soldier. I did not spoil anything for you. This is the first 10 minutes. Please don't write to me in the comments about it. Then the setup for the rest of the game is months after basically coming back from the dead, another terrorist attack on Sharif Industries happens. This time, a group of anti-augmentation radicals. Your mission for the rest of the game is to track these guys down. The next thing you want to work on, of course, is your main story after you do the opening scene and the beginning setup. The main story and the endings. To avoid a Bandersnatcher situation, I suggest figuring out what you want the ending to be before you outline the rest of the story, because that will determine the different paths and options for the rest of the game. Do you want your story to be linear and have one ending despite all the choices you make? This is very common with like point and clicks and action adventure, where even though you may have messed up along the way or done some screwed up stuff, it doesn't really impact the ending of the game. Or do you want your story to follow different paths? Most video game stories come down to one final choice, except for games like Fallout, where you get like karma, where you have like a karma points where you get the good or the bad ending depending on all the shady stuff you do. So ask yourself this: how many endings do you want? You could have no ending like Stardew Valley, where it just keeps going on and on and on forever. You could have just one that's the same no matter what. You could have a good ending and a bad ending like in Undertale or in Fallout, where it all depends on the overall general choices you make. You could have a good one, a bad one, and a medium one like Far Cry 4, where depending on which person you end up aligning yourself with will determine the future of Kirat. Do you have any doomsday scenarios? Limit yourself to a single number, to a single digit number, otherwise you may never actually get to creating the video game. It may never end and you could end up in a Bandersnatcher situation where you somehow drive yourself insane. If you have multiple endings, how do you want the players to get to the different endings? So if you figure out your ending first, that will help you build the rest of the story around the endings. After you figure out all this fun stuff, you need to determine what kind of game it's going to be. So calling back to the initial mechanics of figuring out the initial mechanics of your game, what genre is the game going to be? Because each game genre has its own conventions and different ways the stories normally unfold. So you have your role-playing game like your RPGs, you have first-person shooters like Half-Life and Halo, you have a platformer like Super Mario Brothers, you have your classic beat-em-ups, you have stealth games like Metal Gear Solid, Deus Ex, Splinter Cell, you have point-and-click games like those Nancy Drew games I keep talking about, you have your rhythm games like Guitar Hero, you also have, Brutal Legend, which kind of combined like a turn-based game and a rhythm game all at once, and it was amazing. You have your turn-based games as well, and you have your games that are kind of centered around puzzles. You also have real-time strategies. It's not an exhaustive list of the different types of video games that are out there, and oftentimes the different video games kind of overlap and take elements from one another, so they're kind of just creating new ones every day. But once you figure that out, then you are ready to start your video game story. That's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If I find out more as I take this game design class, I will be more than happy to share and make this a little series. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe if you want more fabulous content from me. I post videos 1 to 2 times a week. And of course, happy gaming!